It started like all good retiree stories do, with a cruise brochure and an impulsive splurge of good intentions. 45 years of late nights, missed birthdays, and project deadlines had finally matured into a tidy pension fund. And I thought, why not? Let's sail around the Adriatic like we're still in our 30s. Sandra smiled when I told her. She even cried a little, which, in hindsight, I should have known was overkill. But I took it as gratitude. This was the trip we'd been postponing since '89, since before the hip replacement, before the layoffs, before she traded her scrubs for flowing robes and a digital following that eats up her chakra wisdom like it's gospel. I didn't mind. Everyone needs a hobby. Hers just happened to involve moonstone necklaces and a lot of incense. The day before we flew out, I was doing the usual, packing, double-checking her supplements, hiding the extra cash in a zippered sock. That's when I found it, wedged between her yoga pants and that damn eucalyptus spray she never goes anywhere without. A phone. Not her phone. A second one. Old model, cracked screen, still warm like it had just been used. I opened it. No passcode. At first, I told myself it was innocent, maybe for work, maybe a backup. But Sandra doesn't do backups. Sandra doesn't believe in backups. The universe will provide, she says. Apparently, it provides dick pics too. Dozens of them. From the same number. I scrolled. The messages were relentless. Hotel confirmations, sleazy poetry, thank you notes for watches she'd bought him, lingerie receipts with my bank statements attached. They'd met up in Sedona, Tulum, even Big Sur, each time under the guise of a healing weekend. She begged me not to ruin with my engineering energy. Turns out I was ruining it just by existing. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the phone, watching the little blinking cursor next to a half-written text. He's transferring the rest of the funds next week. I'll make sure he doesn't see the paperwork. My hand didn't shake. I was proud of that. What did shake was something inside me, something so old and buried I didn't even know it still had teeth. But that's the funny thing about betrayal, it has a smell. And once you've caught it, you start noticing it everywhere. The long showers. The laughter behind locked doors. The mysterious business consultations she'd leave for in silk scarves and return from with Chanel samples in her purse. I didn't confront her, not right away. I zipped the phone back into its little hiding spot like I was tucking a rattlesnake in for bed. I even smiled at dinner that night. Told her I was excited for the cruise. Told her I couldn't believe how lucky I was to have her. She smiled back. Said I looked younger lately. It was almost touching, if you enjoy watching snakes try to look innocent. I let her sleep that night, curled next to me like a house cat full of secrets. And when she breathed out that little sigh she always does, like her soul was being filtered through a diffuser, I closed my eyes and pictured her lover's face, not because I was jealous, but because I knew him. Knew him too damn well. Former contractor from my old division. I'd gone to bat for him when the company was about to toss him for a failed materials bid. Gave him a second chance. Even had him over for dinner once. He brought wine. Now he was bringing something else. But this wasn't rage, not exactly. This was clarity. Cold, focused, absolute. I realized in that moment that I'd spent a lifetime building things, wings, engines, algorithms. Now it was time to dismantle something. Something built on my trust, my money, my silence. And here's the best part, the part one laugh about now when I'm sitting in the garage with my soldering iron and an old Philco. She still thinks I don't know. Still thinks I'm the sweet old man who can't figure out online banking. Still thinks she's steering the ship. But the tide has turned, and Sandra's about to discover what happens when you steal from an engineer, especially one who's been quietly rerouting wires his whole life. So yes, we're still going on that cruise. She'll pack her eucalyptus spray, her designer sunglasses, and I'll pack the divorce papers she won't see coming. But not yet. No, not yet. Because I want her to spin just a little more. I want her to invest. I want her to dig that hole so deep she forgets which way is up. And when she finally thinks she's free of me, when she signs her name on the last dotted line of that little loan she thinks is a shortcut to paradise, I'll be standing on the shore, watching the tide drag her right back in. Looking back, I suppose there was a rhythm to our life, like a quiet metronome ticking under the surface, something you stop noticing until it skips a beat. We met in a hardware store, of all places, back when Sandra still wore orthopedic shoes and didn't talk about aligning her aura before breakfast. I was buying screws for a cabinet hinge. She was looking lost in the paint aisle. I offered directions. She offered a smile. And somehow 25 years later, we were still eating lentil soup on Tuesdays. It wasn't fireworks. Thank God for that. Fireworks are loud and unpredictable. We had something better, stability, or so I thought. She took care of the groceries, the garden, the holiday cards. I handled taxes, maintenance, the little things that keep a house from falling apart. We had routines so polished they didn't even need conversation. Morning coffee at 7:15, crossword done by 8. Then she'd retreat to her office to manage her wellness blog while I tinkered with my radios or listened to war memoirs. She always said I was anchoring energy. I thought that was her way of saying I kept things steady. Now I realize she meant I was the weight she tied to her ship so she could drift off without floating away. The signs were there, of course. Little shifts. She stopped asking about my projects. Stopped laughing at my bad puns. Started locking her laptop. Client confidentiality, she said once, with that plastic smile she'd picked up from her influencer friends. She began going to more retreats, more networking weekends, usually in places where the Wi-Fi was mysteriously bad. At first, I didn't mind. I figured she needed space. We're not kids. We don't need to be up each other's noses every minute. But it was in the little things where the cracks showed. Like the way she'd leave the room when I came in. Or how she suddenly knew a lot about real estate tax loopholes, something she'd never shown an ounce of interest in before. She started dropping names I didn't recognize. "Oh, Graham says that's a seller's market," she'd say, pouring wine like we were celebrating something. "Who's Graham?" I asked once. She blinked. Said he was a client. Then she changed the subject to whether the front porch needed repainting. I let it go. Not because I believed her, but because I didn't want to believe anything else. Because if I tugged at that thread, I wasn't sure what would unravel. And so, I settled back into our life, pretending not to notice the long silences at dinner, the credit card bills with spa charges in cities we'd never visited together, the strange cologne that lingered on her shawls like an echo. I told myself it was midlife reinvention, that she was finding herself, that maybe I should be proud of her for building something of her own. But deep down, in that quiet engineer's mind of mine, I was mapping a different kind of blueprint, one built not from hope, but from patterns. Because that's the thing about systems. Once you know how they work, you also know how they fail. And Sandra, for all her spiritual rhetoric and moonlight manifesting, was running a system. I just hadn't realized yet that I was the power source. The routine kept me blind. Kept me thinking things were still okay. She still kissed me goodbye. Still made my tea exactly how I like it, 2 sugars, no milk, steeped for 5 minutes. It was those gestures that convinced me to ignore the red flags, to let the unease settle like dust on a shelf I never quite got around to cleaning. But even dust accumulates. And the truth has a way of finding its way in through the cracks, like smoke from a fire you can't see yet. The calm before the storm wasn't a lie, it was a trap. One I walked into every day with a smile, thinking peace was permanent. Thinking love, once earned, stayed earned. But love isn't a pension. It doesn't mature with time. It has to be fed, watered, spoken to. And Sandra? She'd stopped feeding it long ago. She'd just forgotten to tell me. Or maybe she hadn't forgotten at all. Maybe she thought I'd never notice. That's the part that still makes my hands curl a little when I think about it. Not the cheating, not the money, not even the betrayal. It's the assumption. The quiet calculation that I'd be too slow, too trusting, too busy reminiscing about my old career to see the truth crawling through the walls. But I saw it. Eventually. And now that I have, I realize those peaceful years weren't peace. They were anesthesia. And I'm waking up. It was a Tuesday when the first real crack split through the wall. The kind of day so ordinary it should have been forgettable. Coffee at 7:15. Crossword by 8. Sandra in the sunroom for her client consults. I was halfway through fixing a blown capacitor on the old Zenith radio when the power flickered. Just for a second. Enough to reset the Wi-Fi. Enough to send her voice, clear as a bell, floating through the house from the Zoom call she forgot to mute. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was on my way to the garage to reset the breaker when I heard it. Laughter, low and too familiar, and then a man's voice, not mine, saying, "When are you finally going to tell him?" My stomach dropped like I'd missed the last step on the stairs. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorframe. Sandra laughed again, softer this time, almost like a sigh. He's old school. He still writes checks and thinks the cloud is weather. I'll handle it when the time's right. She wasn't angry. She wasn't nervous. She sounded bored. Like she was discussing a maintenance delay with a contractor. Like I wasn't a person, just a hurdle to be gently moved. The call ended seconds later, the Wi-Fi snapping back on, her voice returning to the usual tone she uses when she's selling salt lamps to women in Arizona. I didn't move. I just stood there, suddenly aware of how quiet the house really was, how every tick of the old hallway clock now sounded like a countdown. I went back to the garage, sat down on the workbench, and stared at the broken radio I'd been fixing like it had answers. What did he mean? Finally tell me. Tell me what? And what did she mean by old school, as if being grounded, methodical, made me blind? I replayed it in my head 100 times that night, her words like a splinter under my fingernail. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I watched. Not like a jealous husband. Like an engineer evaluating a system showing signs of internal stress. She must have sensed it, because that week she started being sweeter. Made my favorite chicken pot pie from scratch, even ironed my shirts, which she hadn't done in years. She played our wedding song on the Bluetooth speaker one night while making dinner and asked if I remembered our honeymoon. Of course, I said, smiling. How could I forget Acapulco? Her eyes flickered, just a beat too long. We went to Belize, she corrected gently, and my heart twisted. Not because I'd gotten it wrong, because she thought I had. That's when I knew she wasn't reminiscing. She was covering. The kind of cover you do when you think someone's onto you, but you're not sure how much they know. And that's when I realized this wasn't a sudden fall. This was rot. Long, slow, hidden. I started noticing everything. Her phone always face down. The way she changed her passwords. Her sudden obsession with privacy, even within the house. Energy boundaries, she called it. I started checking the mail before she could. Started scanning receipts in the trash. A charge from a boutique in San Francisco. We hadn't been to the city in years. She claimed it was for a friend. Bethany's birthday, she said, with that too smooth voice she uses when she's trying to sell something she doesn't believe in. I nodded. I smiled. But something inside me, something cold and precise, was taking notes. I began sleeping less, waking up early just to sit with my tea and watch her as she moved through our house like she owned the story. And I started feeling it, not just suspicion, but a kind of mourning. Not for her, but for the version of her I'd believed in. For the life I thought we'd built. Because when someone you trust starts lying, the lies aren't what hurt the most. It's how easily they blend into the truth. And you start questioning everything. Did she ever love me? Was I ever more than a safety net? A pension plan with a pulse? I didn't want to believe it. But that Tuesday, that damned ordinary Tuesday, turned something inside me. Not all at once. Not fire and fury. But like steel shifting in slow tension, like a bridge about to snap. And I knew from that moment on, I couldn't go back. Not to trust. Not to ignorance. Not even to peace. Because now I'd heard it. When are you finally going to tell him? And nothing, no pie, no playlist, no smile could ever undo that sentence. Something changed in me after that Tuesday, something fundamental, like a hinge resetting itself. I stopped being the husband, the sentimentalist, the man hoping it would all just blow over, and I started becoming something else, a collector. Not of antiques, not of memories, but of information. Quietly, surgically, like the way I used to troubleshoot faulty telemetry code at the firm. No emotion, just inputs, outputs, anomalies. I didn't confront Sandra. I smiled more. Asked about her clients with genuine curiosity. Let her think I'd gone soft with age, that I was slipping into a gentle fog of retirement and routine. Meanwhile, I got to work. It started with her laptop, one she left open just long enough on the kitchen counter while she took a call in the yard. She didn't log out. That was her first mistake. The second was underestimating how much I still remember about root folders and recovery paths. I didn't touch her emails, too obvious. Instead, I pulled down a few unassuming PDFs from her downloads. Real estate documents, loan applications, 2 invoices with my name on them, and a signature I sure as hell didn't write. That night, I made copies and stashed them in a hard drive hidden inside a busted transistor radio. It was almost poetic, hiding her betrayal inside a symbol of trust. From there, I kept going. Started tracking her mileage, not with GPS or any spy tech nonsense, but the gas receipts she carelessly tossed in the trash. $53 at a Chevron 60 miles away from the yoga retreat she claimed to be attending. I mapped her lies like I used to map flight paths. Exact, layered, traceable. And then came the real break. An envelope from a bank I didn't recognize, addressed to me, but stuffed at the bottom of the mailbox under a flyer for discounted hearing aids. I opened it while she was out getting her chakras realigned. It was a notice of a loan approval, one I'd apparently co-signed, except I hadn't. The borrower? A shell company with a name that sounded like a wellness brand. The address? A shared workspace downtown I'd never stepped foot in. That's when I brought in Bill. My neighbor 2 doors down, retired IRS analyst, loves bourbon and hates liars. I didn't tell him everything. Just asked for a consult, over some bourbon and a few suspicious documents. He squinted at the numbers, whistled low, and said, "This ain't amateur. Someone's building something off your name." That night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to her breathe, thinking about the way she used to curl her hand over mine when we fell asleep. She still did it. Muscle memory, I guess. Or performance. I didn't move. Just let it sit there. That hand that had signed my name on papers I'd never seen, curled over mine like a spider mimicking affection. The next morning, I followed her. Not tailing her like in the movies. No trench coat, no sunglasses. I told her I had an appointment at the VA clinic. She smiled and kissed my cheek. "Hope it's nothing serious," she said. "Just a little follow-up," I replied. I waited 15 minutes after she left, then drove the opposite direction and parked a block away from the shared workspace listed on the loan. I walked. Slow, like any old man might. Took a seat on a bench across the street and watched. 10 minutes later, she arrived, not in yoga gear, but in a tailored blouse and heels I'd never seen. She walked with purpose, smiling at a man holding the door for her. Not Graham. Not the man from the messages. Someone else. A third variable. I didn't photograph them. I didn't need to. Their body language told me enough. They weren't colleagues. They were co-conspirators. Business partners, maybe. Or something worse. I walked back to my car, my pulse steady, no adrenaline. Just data. Another piece in the growing blueprint. I didn't confront her that night. I told her the VA visit was fine, blood pressure up a little, nothing serious. She nodded, distracted, already half into her phone. I studied her then, not like a husband, but like a man studying a machine he used to know how to fix. And I realized something. She wasn't hiding the betrayal because she was afraid of hurting me. She was hiding it because she thought I was already irrelevant. That's what stung. Not the affair, not the money, but the way she'd quietly erased me from the equation while I was still standing in the room. And now, I had proof, evidence, patterns, timelines. But more than that, I had something sharper, clarity. Cold and clean. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to cry. I wanted to design. Because revenge, like engineering, is best when it's elegant, and I was just getting started. It came on a Sunday. Fitting, really, God's day, a day of quiet rituals. We'd gone to the farmer's market that morning, held hands like actors in a commercial for joint supplements, and smiled at the neighbors. Sandra bought rosemary focaccia and 3 avocados she'd forget about by Wednesday. I carried the bags. She talked about her client lunch later that afternoon, said she might be gone a little longer because they were discussing franchise expansion. I nodded, offered a quiet, "sounds exciting," and kissed her on the forehead, letting my lips linger just long enough to make her believe I still didn't see the knife under the apron. She left wearing a soft pink blouse, innocent color, clever choice, and drove off in the car I paid for, on the phone before she even hit the corner. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. I'd already placed the spare key fob tracker in her glove box. It was primitive but reliable. I watched her location ping from my laptop, first to the coffee shop downtown, then to a side street behind a building I now knew better than my own garage. 30 minutes later, I received the email. Not from her. From the private investigator I'd quietly hired 2 weeks earlier, an old contact from my firm who owed me a favor and still worked corporate fraud on the side. He sent over 6 images. The first 4 were what I expected. Her and the same man from the co-working space, arms around each other, laughing, leaning in over laptops that weren't turned on. But the last 2, that's what sealed it. They were inside the building this time. A private office. Her laptop opened to a document titled Equity Distribution, Soul Spa Holdings. And there it was, clear as an engineer's blueprint. My name, typed neatly under Silent Investor. Her name beside it under Founder. And the final field, pre-signed, scanned, digitally timestamped. My signature. Forged. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because it was perfect. Undeniable. Elegant, in the way crimes sometimes are when the criminal thinks they've nailed the details. That was the moment. Not the betrayal itself. I'd already metabolized that like bad meat. But the audacity. The gall to build an empire from my name. To trade my life's work for essential oils and vaguely worded wellness claims. And not just build it. Sell it. I checked the file's metadata. It had been sent to 3 buyers. Offers pending. I sat there, Laptop humming, rain starting to tap against the windows, and felt nothing. No rage, no panic, no heartbreak. Just stillness. Like when the engine of a jet cuts mid-flight and you realize, for the first time, how much noise you'd been living inside. I closed the laptop and made myself tea, 2 sugars, no milk, steeped 5 minutes. Routine held me together. That and the precision of what I had now. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't some vague intuition you could explain away with therapy speak and herbal tinctures. This was the weapon. She returned 3 hours later, cheeks pink from wine or sun or adrenaline. I didn't care which. She kissed my head, said the meeting had gone beautifully, and asked if I wanted to watch that British crime show we liked. I said sure. We sat on the couch, her head on my shoulder, her legs tucked under a blanket I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. She laughed at the same detective joke she always did. I laughed too. But inside, something was gone. Not broken, removed. Surgically. I watched her like a scientist watching the final seconds of a failed experiment. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a test of systems, and hers was flawed. She designed a structure based on control, secrecy, and charm, and now it was time to take it apart. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just efficiently. Because the cruelest revenge, I've learned, isn't shouting in someone's face. It's watching them smile at you, thinking they've won, while you hold the detonator in your pocket and sip your tea like the world's still turning. She asked if I'd seen the cruise tickets come through yet. Said we should start packing. I said, yes, I saw them. She beamed. And I watched her, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled, the way she leaned into me, completely unaware that every piece was already in motion. She had no idea this was the last peaceful night she'd ever know. And I wasn't going to take that away from her, not yet. Let her sleep. Let her dream. Because now, I was in control. It started with the perfume. She never wore it in the house, always said scents should be seasonal and intentional, some nonsense she picked up from a seminar in Sedona. But tonight, the air around her was thick with something floral and over-designed, like she was trying to rewind the clock with a bottle. She stood in the doorway to my workshop, silhouetted against the hallway light, wearing that soft cashmere wrap I'd bought her before her first wellness retreat. She never wore it unless she wanted something. You've been quiet lately, she said, voice lilting, cautious. I didn't look up from the schematic I wasn't reading. Just thinking, I replied. She stepped closer. About us. The words hung there like a trapdoor with the rope already cut. I looked at her then, just long enough for her to mistake it for softness. She smiled faint, rehearsed. I know I haven't been the easiest lately, she continued, folding her arms and hugging herself like the cold came from inside. Things have been overwhelming. The business. My clients. And I know I've been distant. She paused, glanced down, then back up with damp eyes. But it's not because of you. I could almost hear the page turning in her script. She stepped closer. You've always been my rock, Harold. The only person who sees me for who I really am. She placed her hand over mine, her skin cool, her pressure featherlight, just enough to test the door without opening it. I think I've been afraid, she whispered, afraid that I don't deserve how kind you are to me, that I've messed it all up. There it was the pivot. From seduction to vulnerability. From lie to theater. I think I've been having a sort of emotional spiral. Midlife clarity, maybe. She laughed nervously, that tremble in her voice calibrated just enough to suggest fragility but not madness. She leaned down, kissed the top of my head, let her cheek brush mine like she was tasting my forgiveness before asking for it. Maybe we should cancel the cruise, she said. Just take a few days to reset, stay home, talk. I turned the page in my manual, pretending to study a diagram. You sure? You seemed excited. She hesitated. I am. I was. I want to be close to you again. Her voice caught then, perfectly timed, like a key slipping into a lock. But it didn't turn. Not anymore. Because I saw it now, every twitch, every tremble, every carefully placed word. This wasn't a confession. It was a performance. And she was losing her audience. We've been through a lot, she said, squeezing my hand slightly. I just need you to be patient with me. I'm trying. I turned to her, let my eyes meet hers, let her see the man she thought she still owned. Of course, I said gently. I'm always patient. And for a flicker, I saw it crack. Not big. Not loud. But there, in the corner of her smile. She wasn't sure anymore. Not whether I believed her, whether she still had control. Her hand tightened, her eyes searched mine, looking for the old Harold, the soft one, the one she could steer with a story and a kiss. But he wasn't there. I watched her falter, just for a breath, then rally with a nervous laugh. Maybe we could open that wine you like. Watch a movie, she asked. Like old times. I nodded slowly. You go ahead and open it. I'll be up in a minute. She smiled thin, shaky. She left the room like someone walking on glass, unsure which step would crack it. And I sat there, her scent still hanging in the air like a warning, and let the silence swallow it whole. Because this wasn't love. This wasn't healing. This was a countdown. And now she knew, somewhere in that polished performance of hers, that something had shifted. That I wasn't nodding because I forgave her. I was nodding because I'd already decided how the story ends. The first rule of dismantling a system isn't force, it's misdirection. You don't knock over a structure like Sandra's by kicking down the front door. You turn off the power, loosen the bolts, let it collapse under its own weight. She'd spent years constructing her fantasy, a health brand built on stolen trust, and my quiet name stamped at the bottom of every legal page like a blessing. What she never counted on was that I'd been building something too. Quietly, methodically. My revenge wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be structural. The first thing I did was call the accountant, my accountant, the one she never bothered to charm because she assumed I handled all that boring stuff. I asked him to initiate a full forensic audit of our shared assets, citing suspicion of fraudulent authorization. He didn't ask many questions, just flagged it with the bank. That froze everything she didn't already drain. Next came the trust. Months earlier, I'd quietly moved the house into a living trust under my nephew's name, an estate law trick Sandra wouldn't notice because she stopped reading anything that didn't include the words holistic or branding opportunity. Legally, the roof over her head was no longer hers. Then I made sure the cruise tickets were non-refundable, under her name only. When she finds out, she'll think it's a glitch. When she calls the agency, they'll tell her the card was declined. When she checks with the bank, she'll find a block on all transactions due to an internal fraud investigation. I won't be there when that happens. I'll be at Bill's cabin, upstate, already logged out of every shared account and sipping coffee while her empire begins to stutter. But that was just the infrastructure. The surgical part was the company, the wellness brand, the fraudulent LLC she built with my forged signature and pipe dreams. She'd pitched it to 3 buyers already. One of them, a mid-sized tech-forward spa company, had reached out for verification. Sandra, in her arrogance, hadn't told me. But the email came through our joint Gmail account before she could delete it. So I replied, not as Harold, but as a legal proxy, pending civil dispute over asset authorization. Do not engage until cleared. I signed it with an actual paralegal's name. I'd paid for one discreet consult, just for the verbiage. It was enough. The buyer went cold. The sale stalled. She wouldn't know it yet, but her window was closing. She'd built her dream on stolen scaffolding, and I just pulled out the last support beam. Then I left her a gift. A single manila folder, slid carefully under the passenger seat of her car. Inside were copies of the loan she forged, the business agreement, the emails I'd collected, screenshots of her with the man she told me was just a contact. At the bottom, a post-it note. I see everything. But you already knew that. I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. By the time she found it, everything else would already be unraveling. The calls she wouldn't get. The payments that would bounce. The conference invitation mysteriously rescinded after a few polite inquiries from concerned partners. Because I'd also reached out to her 2 biggest collaborators under a burner email, of course, with a handful of pointed questions about her legal standing, potential fraud history, and one attachment. A partial scan of the forged signature with the timestamp metadata. No accusations. Just enough to plant seeds. In this world, doubt is fertilizer. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed her credibility to smell like smoke. And in her world, of clean brands, glowing testimonials, and fake enlightenment, smoke is as bad as fire. I didn't do it for vengeance, not really. I did it because she tried to rewrite me out of my own life, and now she'll have to watch me rewrite hers. And the best part? She still thinks we're going on that cruise. Still thinks the worst thing I've done is sleep in the guest room a few nights this week, claiming back pain. But what I'm doing isn't pain. It's precision. It's decades of discipline, redirected. She weaponized my silence. Now I'm weaponizing my attention. She thought I'd fade quietly. But I built things meant to survive in the sky at Mach 2. And her little empire? It was never meant to fly. It started with a text, innocuous on the surface, but I watched her face closely when she read it at breakfast. She tried to hide it, pressing the phone face down beside her teacup, but the blood drained from her cheeks just enough to register in my periphery. Just a client mix-up, she said, smiling too fast. Nothing important. I nodded, took another bite of toast, and asked if she still wanted to leave for the cruise tomorrow. Of course, she said, voice clipped now, eyes darting like a cornered animal. By mid-afternoon, the cracks were widening. Her phone buzzed constantly. At first, she answered in her bright professional tone, all upward inflection and affirmations. But by the third call, her voice turned brittle, defensive. I caught phrases. No, that's not accurate. There must be a mistake. Let me get back to you. And then she stopped answering entirely. Around 4:30, she came into my office, not as the high priestess of wellness, but as a rattled woman trying to keep the scaffolding from crashing down. Do you know anything about a flagged financial review on our joint account? She asked, trying to lace the question with casual concern. I looked up slowly, blinked like I didn't understand. Flagged? What do you mean? She hesitated, I searching mind for any hint of knowledge, any crack in the porcelain of my passive routine. Just something about irregular authorization patterns. Maybe it's a mistake. I'll handle it. I nodded again. I'm sure it's nothing. But her breathing had changed. Shorter. Shallow. The next morning, she was up before me, unusual in itself, and pacing. The cruise tickets had bounced. I knew this because I'd received a confirmation email from the agency hours earlier, canceling the trip under fraud concerns. She didn't tell me that part. Just said there was an issue with the booking and we'd need to reschedule. That's fine, I told her. Honestly, I wasn't feeling up for it. She didn't answer, just stared at me for a second too long, as if trying to read a blueprint with half the lines erased. Then came the calls from her collaborators. I only knew because she began taking them outside, whispering in the garden like a spy caught mid-operation. She tried to keep the act together. Made dinner, played music, even asked if I wanted to do a couple's meditation. But it was all performative now. Desperate theater performed to an audience that had already left the building. The real blow came 2 days later. I was in the garage when I heard the shriek, not theatrical, not rehearsed. Genuine. I walked inside slowly, drying my hands with a rag, and found her at the kitchen counter, laptop open, eyes wide, mouth half open like she'd just swallowed glass. They're pulling out, she said flatly. All of them. My investors. Someone told them, she stopped, turned to me. There's been a smear campaign. Someone's leaking private documents. Things I never meant to share. I tilted my head slightly. That's awful. Her jaw clenched. Do you think someone hacked my files? I shrugged. Could be. That's the risk of building everything online these days, right? Her face twisted, confused, angry, uncertain. She was starting to feel it. The thing you feel when you realize the storm is already inside the house. The next morning, she called a lawyer, one I recognized from a local ad about reputation recovery and digital defamation. He must have told her the same thing I already knew. Once doubt gets into the system, it multiplies. By the end of the week, her newsletter subscribers had dropped by half. Her affiliate deals vanished. Her event at the yoga retreat center was postponed indefinitely due to unforeseen conflicts. She cried that night, not in front of me, but in the bathroom, door closed, faucet running like I couldn't hear her. I didn't go to her. I sat in the guest room reading a book I didn't care about, listening to her world unravel on the other side of the wall. When she finally emerged, mascara streaked and eyes red, she asked, "Do you ever feel like everything's just slipping away?" I looked up, kept my face neutral, my voice soft. "No," I said. "I feel more grounded than I have in years." She didn't know what to do with that. Just stared at me, as if trying to recognize someone she'd forgotten she ever knew. Her hands were trembling, her breath shallow. And in that moment, I saw it. The empire, the identity, the lies, all beginning to collapse inward like a dying star. Quiet, slow, absolute. She found me in the living room, sitting in the leather chair she always said looked too old-fashioned for her aesthetic. I didn't look up when she entered. I just swirled the whiskey in my glass like it held the past 25 years in liquid form. She stood there, awkward in her silk robe, the one she wore when she wanted to seem soft, approachable, feminine. I let the silence stretch long enough to make her twitch. Then I said, without looking at her, "You always did underestimate silence." She blinked, but I kept going. "You thought it meant absence, weakness, that because I didn't shout or cry or beg, I must be too blind or too polite to see what you were doing." I finally turned to her then, and whatever smile she had rehearsed in the mirror dissolved. But silence, Sandra, isn't surrender. It's strategy. And I've been listening, closely, to every lie that slipped through your teeth. Every receipt you tossed, every call you thought I didn't hear, every late-night whisper through the bathroom door. I saw you. All of you. Long before you realized you were being watched. She started to speak, but I raised a hand. Calm, casual, final. No more lines, Sandra. No more pity-party nonsense about how lost you were, or how this wasn't the real you. Because this was you. This is you. The version you thought I'd never meet because you kept her tucked behind candles and wellness hashtags. I stood up then, slowly, deliberately. I let you bury me in routine while you played alchemist with my retirement. You turned my name into your startup currency. Stamped my signature on loans like I was already dead. And you smiled through all of it like a woman who believes her husband will die before he ever wakes up. Her face twisted, something between shame and rage, but I didn't stop. I stepped closer, each word a precise incision. You didn't just cheat, Sandra. You authored a new life and used my blood as the ink. You thought I wouldn't notice. Or if I did, you thought I'd be too old, too tired, too in love to care. But you forgot one thing. I was an engineer. I don't guess. I test. And I've tested every variable in your little empire, and I promise you, none of it's structurally sound. She was crying now, the kind of tears meant to trigger a reflex, to resurrect the old man who used to hold her and say everything would be okay. But that man's gone. I leaned in, voice colder than I knew I could make it. You thought I was your safety net. You never once considered I might be the knife. I handed her the folder, the original one, the one with every printout, every forged signature, every photo. She opened it with shaking fingers, scanned the pages, and crumpled into the chair across from mine. I'm not taking you to court, I said flatly. Not because you don't deserve it, but because watching your brand, your following, your credibility die slowly and quietly, that's better than any courtroom. You'll spend the next 5 years watching doors close that you don't even know were opened because of me. Investors won't return your calls. Venues will quietly decline. Friends will drift, not because I'll say a word, but because I already did. She looked up then, eyes wide, desperate. Please, Harold. But I was already walking past her. You should pack your things. The house isn't yours. Never was. It's in a trust you don't control. You've got 3 days before the security system changes codes. That's more mercy than you gave me. I paused in the doorway. You wanted a new life. Congratulations. You have it. Now go see how far it gets you without me underwriting it. Then I left her there, small, shaking, wrapped in expensive silk, and all alone, surrounded by the ashes of a kingdom she built on the bones of a man who was supposed to be too old to fight back. She's gone now. Left quietly, like a con artist sneaking out the back of a show she didn't realize had been canceled. No grand exit, no tantrum, no final plea. Just a note on the kitchen counter I didn't read. I saw the folded paper, recognized the handwriting, and dropped it straight into the fireplace. Her scent still lingers faintly in the hallway, like rot in the walls of a beautiful house, something that takes time to purge. I haven't replaced the furniture, haven't touched her side of the closet. I don't need to. Her absence speaks louder than her presence ever did. She's out there now, somewhere, trying to piece together what the hell happened, trying to resurrect a reputation she doesn't understand is already dead. They won't say it to her face, not yet, cowards never do, but the people she tried to impress, manipulate, monetize, they've already moved on. That's how this world works. All it takes is one whisper in the right inbox and the gears stop turning. The sponsors go silent. The audience turns away, and you're left screaming into a void that used to echo with applause. Meanwhile, I wake up early, not because I'm old, but because I can. I drink my tea in silence, no longer trying to fill it with conversation or pretending I care about the latest branding tactic for overpriced seaweed balm. I've started rebuilding radios again. It's honest work. Clean. Every part has a purpose. Every wire tells the truth. There's peace in that, a kind of brutal, satisfying order. Sometimes people ask me how I'm doing. I smile. Say, never better. They assume I'm lying. I'm not. I'm clear. No confusion. No uncertainty. I know who I am. I know what she was. And I know exactly how close I came to spending the rest of my life applauding my own extinction. There's a scar now, sure. But it's not on my heart, it's on my threshold. It's a mark that reminds me, no one walks in without being seen. I've made a habit of silence. Not the kind that waits, but the kind that watches. That calculates. That prepares. And I've learned something in all this. Revenge doesn't bring peace. It brings clarity, and that's better. Peace can be broken. Clarity? That stays. Forever. So no, I don't miss her. I don't wish her well. I don't hope she finds herself. She already did. And I burned it down. This isn't a love story. It's a blueprint. One she helped draw, and I finished. Let her tell whatever story she wants now, if anyone's still listening. But me? I'm done talking. Because the man she tried to erase is still here, older, sharper, and finally, gloriously alone.